I'm Scott Wright. This is Speaking of Opera, and I'm speaking with Evan Mack and Joshua McGuire. They are together the authors, the composer, and librettist of The Ghosts of Gatsby, among other things. They're pretty prolific, but it's about the life of Zelda Fitzgerald, and Mobile Opera will be producing it on March the 21st and 23rd, 2025. So everybody thinks of opera as this sort of dead language, where that it came to us from the last couple of centuries, and yet there's so much of it being written today, including you two, who are very much alive. So, how did you come to the idea of creating opera?
I was very fortunate, a pianist by trade and had always composed. When I was finishing up my graduate studies in Cincinnati, I was a music director at a church, and I heard about this story of a nun from Ohio at the age of 73 who devoted her entire life to the Amazon, helping poor farmers live sustainably off of the land. She was murdered by hire in 2005. And at the moment that it happened, she actually pulled out her Bible to the gunman and said, "This is my only weapon," and started reading the Beatitudes. And they killed her. And for whatever reason, I said, "That sounds like an opera." And I was given access to her
It
letters from,
does.
yes, it does. And it was 1969 until a week before she was killed. I was given an access to all of her letters. And that ultimately became the libretto of my first opera, Angel of the Amazon. And I was very lucky. Encompass New Opera Theater in New York City took it and developed it and ran an entire month at the British Golf Arts Center in New York City. And it got great reviews and a good response and a cast recording. And everyone said, "What's next?" And I was like, "What do you mean, what's next? I just spent 5.5 years writing this piece. Though, wait a minute. I should write more operas." That's what it took, right? So I knew from my first experience, never again will I write another libretto ever, ever, ever. And so I reached out to Josh, who is a fantastic musician and a fantastic wordsmith. And I had known him for years. And I said, "Josh, do you want to work on an adaptation of a new opera with me?" And that's how our team began.
Yeah, yeah, and it took it over from there. And it was not that was not a call I expected to receive. That was yeah, I still remember Evan asking, you think you could adapt a novel for the opera stage? And I was shaking my head no and saying yes, over the phone. Um, but it proved to be I had always had this sort of split identity. I went through school as a double major in music and English and never quite decided. And I thought, ooh, here's a way I can just continue to not decide, what the medium is, because I think that I keep working in opera because there's something that only it can do. There's a sort of expanded meaning in the word, and there's an expanded meaning in the music that only happens there. And I just love playing with that sort of third point between words and music. As I think people will see, there's well, anyone knows who's been to the opera, there's a thing that takes over, in the moment of performance. And that's my drug. It's just the way it is.
Greater than the sum of its parts, isn't it? This opera is about the life of Zelda Fitzgerald, a literary notable and wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald. How did you come to that subject?
Well, we were very fortunate and approached by director Kristen Kenning at Stanford University. She recognized the benefit of new opera, not only as an art form, but training for her students, as there's an American Renaissance currently happening of newer and newer operas being created. And so she wanted her students to experience that. And so she reached out to us. She had staged some of our scenes and had helped us workshop another opera. And so it became this inevitable step in a collaboration. We had certain parameters for the commission, and one of it had to be connected to Alabama. So Josh and I did a ton of stories, the deep dive on things. There's a lady who was hit by the largest meteorite ever and survived to tell the tale. That
Gettysburg.
was a thought for a little bit. Yeah. So like all of these things. And then, we started looking, of course, the literary realm and adaptation, but we found that really Zelda Fitzgerald, is a story untold because it's always through the lens of her husband, Scott. We read his books in 11th grade English class. And so it became the premise of like, oh, there's something really here. And we knew we didn't want to tell their entire story from, beginning to end we wanted to use theatrical devices to tell that story. And so what was very helpful was Josh came up with this sense of three Zeldas, right? And because she really had three phases of her life, the belle of the ball, the flapper girl that we know, and then in her latter years, dealing with depression and mental illness in an asylum. And those are the three Zeldas that we see and really don't unearth in our research, in our reading, in our lens through looking at her through Scott. And so that became then the centerpiece of the opera.
There's a new book about Zelda, seemed to put a lot of emphasis on how her art was shaped and suppressed by her husband and by her family.
I think when you begin an opera, I mean, it's a really deeply intuitive gesture. Like I just quickly scanned some biographies, some letters, and so on, and said, "Oh, well, she's an aria machine. There's something there." And part of it was that contrast between the three stages of her life, and any one of those lives would have been a remarkable life. And in 48 years, she lived all three. And I also was attracted to it simply because, like, at this point, I'm more interested in the drama inside people as opposed to the drama between people. It seems to me that life provides enough of the drama between people, but it's the drama inside you that really gets you in the end. I trusted Evan, we had this relationship where it was like, oh, well, if I throw you three of the same person, you can make sense of that in music, and that it was not going to be a linear drama, but it was going to be more of a kind of spiral drama. And that all just sort of came at once. And I had nothing but a blind confidence that we could pull it off. And so just began. It was not a systematic thing of, because I found this in these documents, I want to tell this story about Zelda. It was not that. It was more of a sense of the operatic moment and then gambling on that.
Yeah, I would just add though, there's a lot of that sense of it. I mean, but we have a line in there, where she says, "You plagiarize me," and again, that's Josh talking about the internal dynamics, right? Because that means a lot of things. So to the scholarly mind, it's like, yeah, she wrote some works and he took them and put his name on it and published that. Now, some of that was to her consent because if she published it, she'd get $50 for the article, where he would get three times that. So it was also, they were short on cast and he did that. On the other hand, you plagiarize me, with two other Zeldas around there and they react, that actually has a whole other layered meaning. And that's where the theatrical retelling works. So yeah, we did our research on some of those things, and what you see on stage is a dramatization of that. But those events are based on things that happen, right? They did get in a fight. It was 1924 Paris. She did have a breakdown at that time. It was when he was putting the last sentences of the Great Gatsby on his typewriter. So there are things happening that create that wonderful electricity in the theater, especially this piece. I'm not going to give it away, but there is a moment in that opera where they get gobsmacked. Their jaw drops and they go, "What?" And you can feel that electric silence. People clap, but when you get that electricity in the audience, there is nothing better. And this opera, really captures that moment where people have gone, like, you hear it. It's very cool.
I know that moment of the collective inhalation of breath,
Yes.
because I saw the premiere at Samford University. I just knew that we had to do this. So I congratulate you on it, and I can't wait to hear it on, as I said, March the 21st and 23rd.
Great. Well, thank you for your kind words, and we appreciate you doing this. And I will reassure your audience that Josh and I do, because people will hear new opera and they will maybe take pause. The music is accessible. It's beautiful. It lives in the world of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s as a sound world. There are things where we invoke Satie in France and Rhapsody in Blue and a Charleston and all of these wonderful things that have a sense of familiarity, but through the lens of A Day in the Life and Marriage and Madness of Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald.
So what's next for you?
Well, that is a big question.
Yeah.
As to what's next, we're finishing a commission now for Lawrence University in Wisconsin, a story based on the life of Ruth Coker Burks, who was an early activist in AIDS awareness in the 1980s. I'm riding the train. I can't say how it looks from the outside, but
yeah, but it's a beautiful story of a person showing great empathy in a time of great fear. We're still developing a musical comedy based on Boris Yeltsin's visit to a Texas grocery store in which he renounced communism in the parking lot in 1989. I do believe, though, it's more American stories to tell. And so I'm glad that we're able to add to that list of operas that are getting done. So in the next 5, 10, 15 years, I think it's going to be actually more Americana. My only goal, it's a funny one, but I'm hoping one day when I tell someone on the street that I compose opera, that they don't ask, is it in Italian or German? And I'm going to say, no, it is uniquely American and English.
I'm looking forward to, I hope we can do them here, and I hope you have great success. Thanks for talking with me about this today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.